Hi everyone, welcome to the live JIPMAT 2023 analysis. Now we had the paper today between 3 o'clock to 5:30 p.m. And as far as the discussion that I've had with all my students, I have not come across anyone who had any difficulty in getting into the center or even uh, you know accessing the test or with the test platform or with the processes that were to be followed. In fact, as has been the case with JIPMAT, because the time is 2.5 hours for the 100 questions, the students found that the time was again in excess, and everyone had a little time in the end, which they could, where they did not have any questions to solve. So let's quickly get started with the analysis of JIPMAT 2023. Before we go ahead, one quick disclaimer. This analysis has been created with the first cut or the first impressions that we've got from all the test takers and the faculty members who went through the test. However, as we go ahead, we will get the actual paper for the actual response sheet, so that at that point we might be able to give a little more accurate analysis. So let's quickly go ahead. The paper pattern for JIPMAT 2023. So there were 3 sections and there were 100 questions, and total duration was 150 minutes. There is no sectional time limit. There are 4 marks for every correct question and -1 for every wrong question. Let's continue with the overview. Sorry for that disturbance. So for JIPMAT 2023, as we have analyzed, the quantitative aptitude section or the quantitative ability section was easy to moderate. Now, the section overall was easy, but there were a couple of questions here and there which were slightly lengthy or difficult, and students could get confused in those questions, and that is why we get the good attempts at 30 out of the 33 and a good score to be around 110 or more. Similarly, the logical reasoning section was also easy to moderate. There were a couple of questions there as well which were quite difficult to crack, and that is why again the section overall was easy to moderate, and the good attempts would be around 29 to 30 only. It was similar to QA, just that the good attempts would be around 29 to 30. Okay, and as far as the verbal ability section is concerned, I've been a little cautious in putting the good attempts as 33 out of 34. Otherwise, for someone who's good at verbal, they would be able to attempt 34 questions also, and some of the students would also be able to get those 34 correct as well. So that was the level of difficulty of the verbal ability section. It was very, very easy, and that is why the good score for verbal section is 125 plus. If you add what I've given you as the good scores, the total that you'll get would be 345. But as far as the overall difficulty is concerned, we feel that students would be able to get around 90 plus questions and they can score around 335. If you ask me how would one score 335, I feel that someone who attempts 90 to 93 questions with around 90 to 95% accuracy, a 335 score is possible. So let us get into the details of section wise breakup of questions. So if I look at the quantitative ability section, I found that the good attempts would be 30 plus and a good score of 110. And this could be done in 45 to 50 minutes. Now, I've been a little liberal as far as the time allocation is concerned because JIPMAT gives us that liberty. So why not use it? See, ultimately, it is all about accuracy. You will never see an exam where we claim to, where we ask students to have a 90+% of accuracy. But here, because the time is so much in excess, you are expected to have a higher amount of or higher percentage of accuracy. There were few questions of percentages. The number for percentages, around 2 to 3 questions from percentages, profit loss and SICI. One question from ratios. There was one question from time, speed, distance, and one question from time and work. The time and work question was slightly difficult because it was not a regular question. So in the QA section, there were questions which were miscellaneous. Now, when I say miscellaneous, there were questions which were like true or false. You were given statement 1, you were given statement 2, and the options were like both the statements are true, both the statements are false. Statement 1 is true, but statement 2 is false, or statement 1 is false, but statement 2 is true. And for such questions, you have to solve both the statements. So in one question, you kind of have 2 questions. So that is why the time and work question was quite lengthy. because it was a part of such a such a question type. There was one question on surds which was based on under root of surds. So square root of surd, and again that was not very straightforward. It was square root of 3 plus root 5. So if you studied square root of calculating the square root of surds, you would be able to handle that. If you haven't learned that, you would have to go backwards. That is, you would take the whole square of each answer option, and then check which answer option fits in. So that would take a lot of time. There were questions on linear and quadratic equations, some of them in the miscellaneous format also. There was question on integral solutions of a linear equation as well. So that could be a little time consuming. As far as the progressions are concerned, there was one question on progressions. The bulk of questions came in from geometry. Now in geometry, there were almost four questions from mensuration, two from cubes, two from cylinders, and the cubes based questions, were quite easy as far as the calculations were concerned. There was one question where, the ratios were given. Okay. So you were given the ratio of heights and, the all such things in terms of cylinders, sorry. So, it was, if you were clear with the concepts, you would be able to handle those questions. Circle based questions were also very conceptual, not very lengthy. Okay, so if you did your basics of geometry well, you would be able to handle the entire geometry and mensuration based 7 to 8 questions that we had. There was one question on set theory or Venn diagram, which was very basic, and almost 3 to 4 questions of probability. So, kind of these topics, especially permutations, combinations, probability, because they are kind of the topics which are taught to students in class 11th and 12th. Some students tend to leave out such topics while preparing for exams. So if you haven't left out these topics, and if you've gone through all the material or the basic classroom courseware, you would have been able to handle the probability questions well. There was one question on trigonometry where sine theta plus cos theta was equal to 0, and you had to find out the value of sine to the power 4 theta plus cos to the power 4 theta, something like that. So that was also a straightforward question, because that you could have simply substituted the values and got the you could have identified their magnitude would be 1 by root 2 and handled that question. There was one question on functions, and there were a lot of questions on numbers. Now numbers questions were based on divisibility tests, or if there's a number which is k square minus 1, then what can you comment about a number k square minus 1 which is divisible by 8, then what can be said about k? So such kind of questions were there from numbers. Again, these kind of questions, because you had so much time, they are easy. When it comes to time limitation that you have to answer these questions very quickly, they could become a little challenging, because you would have to you would have to answer them quickly. But here, because you had the liberty of taking a lot of time, you could handle these questions. Some of the divisibility questions also were a part of the true and false question type. So that is why the questions could get a little lengthy. But again, if you were clear with the concepts, and if you gave them the ample amount of time, you could handle them. There was one question of SICI which was typically very lengthy. So that was one of the questions which I assume that students could have left or kept for later. However, because we had ample amount of time for these 33 questions that we had of QA, even if you gave 50 or 55 minutes, that would be fine. In my opinion, the ideal time required to attempt all questions of QA would be around 45 to 50 minutes, and you could have scored around 110. You could have scored around 110 marks here. If I move on to the next section, that is logical reasoning. So again, there was one question on blood relations. Coding, decoding, there were 2 questions, and number series were 4 questions. Now coding, decoding was slightly difficult. So even for the mentors to crack, basically coding, decoding is something which requires a lot of practice. And if you haven't seen a certain typical type of question, or maybe the logic that is being used in the question, you could get stuck in a coding, decoding, or a number series question. As far as the number series questions were concerned, they were not very tricky, but there was one question in coding, decoding which was slightly difficult to crack. Directions question was very simple. Arrangement based questions, again, there were in the arrangement based, there were a lot of single questions, like, comparing A is greater than B, but B and B is greater than C. So, finding out who is the greatest, who is the smallest, those kind of arrangement questions. Then there was a hexagon based arrangement question. Then there was a linear arrangement based question between students. There was also one matrix arrangement based question where you had 4 students, 4 cities, 4 sports, all of it. And though that matrix arrangement question had 2 questions, it had a lot of parameters, but that was very kind of lengthy. Conditions were also there, but again we had time, so that's why I would consider that one would be able to solve that in the given amount of time that we had. Hexagon based question, many of the students have told me that they found it to be a little ambiguous, like there were multiple cases possible, but some of them who handled the question smartly said told me that we basically have reported that based on the answer options, they were able to identify what basically which case out of the arrangements had to be taken. Now that remains to be seen after we get the actual question paper, whether there was any whether there were multiple cases possible in the arrangement or not. Okay, there were no questions of data sufficiency, surprisingly. As far as the data interpretation is concerned, there was one data interpretation set on students and their scores in 6 subjects. Now here, one had to be careful. The data given was in percentages, and the total marks of each subject were out of 120. So I came across a few students who had not considered this and kind of lost out marks over there. So that would be a spoiler, game changer kind of for students who miss out there. But again, if you missed out on a couple of questions here, you can always cover it up from in terms of the other sections and other questions in this section also. So once basically a table based data interpretation. There was a pie chart based question. Now that pie chart based question again was fairly simple, doable question. And there was one question based on toll, few 4 vehicles, the amount of toll that they have to pay. Now this set, the toll based set, as was reported to me, the values were very close. So it was very calculative, and you had to calculate who has the second highest toll in a week or something. And the values were not very obvious. You had to calculate till the last digit, and that required a little time. But again, as we are all happy, as I've been saying repeatedly, the time was way in excess. So that's why that was not an issue for us. As far as clocks and calendars are concerned, there were 3 to 4 questions on clocks and calendars. There was also a match the column question type in LR. So just like you had true and false as a question type in QA section, there were a few match the column questions in LR. So here what you had was, basically one was a straightforward clock based question where you were given time. Another question was based on match the columns. So you're given 4 different sub questions. The easier part here was, even if you solve one of the match the column, so if column A and column B, if you match one of the elements of column A to column B correctly, you were able to eliminate the options and get to the answer. So that's why it wasn't lengthy. Okay. Directions based questions was one. I realized that I've added that twice. Okay. There were 3 to 4 questions on analogy and odd man out. Analogy was fairly simple, but odd man out had jumbled words, and then you had to odd man out. For example, summer, winter, monsoon, and clouds. So the words were jumbled. Summer would not be spelled summer. So the spelling was also jumbled, and then you had to arrange it to form a meaningful word and then get the odd man out. There were a couple of questions on logical connectives. If it rains today, the road will get wet, kind of, and you had to draw appropriate conclusions. So this was about the LR section. As you can see, the most dreaded part, that is the verbal reasoning part, arrangement, arguments, and statement conclusion, assumptions, cause and effect. Such question types are not tested in JIPMAT, and that is what makes your LR section very high scoring, as good as quant section, because you don't have a lot of scope to lose out marks here. because there's no subjectivity. You get an answer, otherwise you don't get an answer. So that's why this section also was easy to moderate, because there were a couple of questions here and there which were slightly lengthy or a little ambiguous. And that's why the good attempts and good score are similar to the QA section. You would have seen in the overall, I've put good attempts as 29, now 30. So it was a close 29-30 for the LR section. Good score would also be around 110 plus. Ideal time would be the same as QA, or almost 45 to 50 minutes. Okay. And moving on to the verbal ability section, and you had only one reading comprehension of 4 questions, which was a sitter. The questions were very straightforward. There were 4 fill in the blanks questions. Vocabulary, there were 10 synonyms, antonyms questions. So vocabulary, synonyms, antonyms, and idioms. There were 10 questions, out of which 8 questions were straight antonym based questions. 3 of them had the word in the sentence. Otherwise, the words were also given directly. There were two questions on spelling correction also, or the correct spelling. For example, what would be the correct spelling of unequivocal? So the word was not given to you, but there were 4 options, and you just had to identify which of them had a correctly spelled meaningful word. So that was the spelling correct, spotting the correct spelling. Then there were questions based on sentence correction and error spotting. Now, sentence correction or error spotting type questions were, more than sentence correction, the question was correct sentence. You had 4 of statements in the options, and you had to identify which of them is grammatically or correct according to the rules of English. So 4 such questions, and there were 2 questions on spotting the error also. Like there were parts of sentence given, you had to identify which part of the sentence had an error. So that was there. There were a couple of questions on fill in the blanks, where you had to fill in with the appropriate prepositions. Then there were basic questions on converting words, sentences from active to passive voice and passive to active voice, converting from direct to indirect speech, and one question on converting indirect speech to direct speech. There were 2 questions on jumbled sentence, where you were given parts of sentences which were parts of a sentence which was jumbled up, and you had to arrange it in the correct order. Kind of basically a question similar to para jumble, but instead of para jumble, it was a sentence jumble. So again, a total of 34 questions. And if someone who had prepared well for verbal ability, they could attempt all the 34 questions, and if not 34, at least 33 questions, and you would be able to score 125 or more, even in less than 25 minutes. So I would assign the ideal time to be 20 to 25 minutes. And the sectional difficulty was not even easy to moderate. In fact, it would be easy only. Okay. So with that, I again come back to my overall analysis. The overall difficulty was easy to moderate. Good score would be around 335 plus, and the section-wise good scores would be 110, 110, and 125. If I hope I have been able to cover capture the essence of the paper. We'll come out with a more detailed analysis once the paper is released. I hope the first cut or the first impression analysis was helpful to you. All the best and good luck with your JIPMAT results.